So next up we have Dr. Gemma Bell, who is from Environment Systems, who's kindly helped to sponsor today's event. So Gemma studied undergraduate and postgraduate degree level in Aberystwyth, completing her PhD in the use of remote sensing looking at pastures in Ross, and has been in Environment Systems since 2011. And today she's going to be talking to us about environmental mapping, looking backwards and looking forwards. So please give a warm hand to Gemma.
Wasn't expecting the full biography. Pnawn da, mae'n bleser a fraint bod yma. Pnawn ma I siarad tymach gwaith ni'n Environment Systems. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon, one of my favourite spots in Aberystwyth, to talk a little bit about our work in Environment Systems. We're really pleased to sponsor the event today, and thank you very much to Hugh and the team for making it possible. So, that's the wrong one. Environment Systems. We are actually close neighbours to the library. We're based on the Science Park just up the road. We're an environmental consultancy, but we work on a variety of scales. We work from the field scale with our team of ecologists right up to the landscape and national scale, doing Earth observation, geoinformatics work. We work on really some of the major problems facing our environment today, the biodiversity crisis, nature recovery, climate change, and also food security. So we are really big users of data. We capture some of our own data from our field team and from analysis of satellite imagery, but we also make use of a lot of existing data sets on portals like Datamap Wales. So I just wanted to touch really briefly, and everyone here is aware by now of just the long and rich history we have in the country of recording environmental data. We've got some of the, and in some cases the longest continuous records of some of these variables in the world, stretching right back to the 1700s, and it's such a valuable data source. But we have to be able to access it. It has to be in the right format. And the problem is the way we use data changes, and there's a new file format and there's a new system that we use to access the data. And if it's not compatible with the new system, it leaves people behind, and it means we're potentially losing access to an awful lot of extremely valuable information. And then we come to this thing called the shifting baseline syndrome, which is where we look out the window and we think nature's absolutely, it's doing great, look at all these birds, look at all these bugs. And our grandparents could have told us that when they looked out the window, there were more birds and there were more bugs. But that memory's been forgotten. And we're in the middle of a climate and biodiversity crisis, and the statistics here are appalling. Wales is one of the most nature-depleted countries on Earth, with almost a fifth of our species at risk of extinction here. And then we're looking at threats posed by climate change, wildfire and flooding, and sea level rise. But if we have good information about our environment, that puts us in a much better place to be able to do something about it, to help the nature recovery and make us more resilient to climate change and deal with all of these problems. So I'm going to talk about just a few examples of some projects we've been involved in at Environment Systems. And I'm going to start with coastal vegetated shingle, which is typically very, very small, patchy habitat. It's found throughout the country, and in Wales you'll find it in Morfa Dinlle, in Gwynedd, and you'll find it in Morfa Bychan, down near Pendain. And it's full of really specially adapted plants they're adapted to a really harsh environment. So shingle environment, there's not a lot of nutrients there. There's not a lot of fresh water. It's battered by strong waves, strong winds. So these plants are pretty special because they live there and they thrive there. But it's a threatened habitat. It's also important for supporting a range of other species, birds and invertebrates. So it's a priority habitat, and it's something that we want to try to conserve. So this was a project we carried out for Natural England. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a national survey of vegetated shingle habitats. And these beautifully detailed maps, as you can see that little image there, of very, very complicated habitats. But those maps then were locked away in the reports. The reports themselves did get digitised. But this project then was to make that data available to today's audience by georeferencing the maps and then digitising the habitat boundaries and applying the habitat classification. The habitat classification is another thing that's changed over time. The way we describe the habitats now is different to the way they were described back then. So part of the project involved translating the habitat classification to the common system. And then we had this vectorised data set. Another important thing about it then was within the attribution, it contained links back to the original report so you could go and find out more about the data. So this is Dungeness in Kent. That's the original map from the report. That's a Google image. Now then, Bethan has already given us a really good explanation of georeferencing and shown us how fiddly it can be. I can't take any of the credit for this, but one of my colleagues very painstakingly digitised, firstly georeferenced all of these images. The problem is, these maps were drawn back in the 1980s and 1990s. The coast is ever changing, and the way it looked back then when it was mapped, it's not always how it looks now. So sometimes it was a bit of a challenge to find really good, reliable points that could be used for georeferencing. But he did it, and we ended up with these beautiful, detailed habitat maps there. And then moving on from that is another project we're carrying out for the South West Coastal Monitoring Programme, which is led by Timbridge Council. It's part of the National Network of Coastal Monitoring Programmes, which is a 5-year rolling programme to monitor the coast. This involves data capture, aerial photography and LiDAR elevation data, and habitat mapping. And environment systems is involved in the habitat mapping component of that. So every 5 years, you get a fresh set of data. You can see how the coastline is changing and how that information feeds into the shoreline management plans. It looks at coastal defence, and it looks at habitat losses and what restoration is needed. So the southwest region looks like this. It starts in Portland Bill, Dorset, goes along to Land's End, and then up along the north coast up to Beachley in Gloucestershire. It includes the Isles of Scilly and the little islands of Lundy, Flatholm, Steepholm. So that's an example of the imagery that we work with. We've got the red, green, blue photography on the top left, colour infrared on the right, and then we have the elevation data bottom left. And that information then is used, we have these skilled interpreters then to actually classify the habitat types using the integrated habitat system. And then this leads into another project, which is similar but different, because Natural England were interested in longer term change. The National Coastal Monitoring Programme probably started producing these habitat maps about 15 years ago. So we've got a nice 5-year cycle of habitat change for the last, say, 15 years. But what about all this historic change? So Natural England wanted us to look back as far in time as we could go, again for the southwest region. They wanted to know about industrialisation. They wanted to know about the increase in agricultural intensity. They wanted to know about loss of coastal habitats. And then this will, support their case for justifying why action needs to be taken to restore nature in places down there, because we've forgotten, because of this shifting baseline syndrome. It's very hard to make a case for restoring something if everybody's forgotten what it was like before. But they wanted some kind of evidence to show how nature has been depleted. So we went back to the historic OS maps, and via the National Library of Scotland, we accessed them via WMS. So we didn't take the TIFF files, we had them straight from WMS. We were focusing on some key estuaries, Axe, Camel, Exe, and Tortorridge, to digitise the habitats to as much detail as we could and compare it to the coastal monitoring data, the most up-to-date data that we had at the time, to quantify the habitat changes. Overall changes, read those while I have a drink. As we'd expect, urban expansion and areas of coastal squeeze. So coastal habitats are very dynamic. They really need to be able to have space to move. And if you have lots of hard built up environments around them, urban areas, it stops the habitats migrating, moving around as with the natural conditions. So that's what we mean by coastal squeeze. We saw beach erosion, some areas of habitat expansion, but these habitat increases were outweighed by the losses overall, and we were able to quantify those changes. So here's some examples of the River Camel. And bottom left, you can see the brown areas there, intertidal mudflats. The image then on the right, we can see there are extra bits of green, which is salt marsh. So this is an area where the salt marsh has actually increased since the middle 1800s. Looking at the Isles of Scilly, we're looking here at areas of sediment erosion and or sea level rise. So there's a spit there in pink called Gutter's Bar, and you can see that that's been eroded in the image on the right. And there's another example from Scilly there. What we're looking at here, we're comparing the yellow crescents, which are the beaches, and you can see there how they've narrowed or disappeared, and again that's beach erosion and or sea level rise. What I find exciting about this, now we're actually getting a time series of these habitat maps, what we can do with that. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at an area where a lot of work has gone in to restore the environment. So I've just taken some screenshots of an area where there's been a managed realignment scheme. So this is where there's been intervention to introduce controlled flooding, and this is to protect downstream infrastructure. So this example is of the Lower Otter Restoration Project in Budleigh Salterton. And this was an area where about 250 years ago, an embankment was built, and this led to the river being artificially straightened. It wasn't flooding the way it naturally would. And as a result, when you straighten a river, the water comes rushing down much more rapidly, and things can flood much more catastrophically. So things had changed to the extent that the embankment was at the risk of a catastrophic flood, which would have flooded the town on the other side. So action was taken to breach the embankment and create a lot of wetland habitat in a controlled way. So if we look at the historic mapping there, you can see where the river's been straightened. This was done in order to create grassland, to create more grazing, more farmland, because those fields on either side of the river would have naturally flooded. In the middle there, I just want to point out the second image I've got there in 2014. Wouldn't it be great if we had one just before that with Bruce's map in the middle there? That would be a great time series. The 2014 map here, this is from the coastal monitoring. We can see there's been relatively little change between 2014 and the 1830s, except you can see the urban development there, bottom left. But then in 2024, with the latest coastal monitoring data, massive change there. You can see how the river's been reconnected to the floodplain, and there's been an awful lot of wetland habitat created. So that is an ecosystem that is functioning much more naturally now. And now I'm jumping back to Wales for a project that it's actually a live project for Pembrokeshire Coast National Park, who wanted to undertake a spatial audit of sites in the national park to work towards the 30 by 30 goal. So 30 by 30 is a global conservation target to protect 30% of Earth's land and sea by the year 2030. And it's been adopted by the Welsh Government, aims to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and mitigate climate change. And the national park wants to achieve 30 by 30 within the national park. So to start with, we needed to work out how far they are at the moment, and we needed to consider, first of all, what sites are eligible to be considered for 30 by 30. We're not just looking at any place that looks quite good for nature, because lots of sites are at risk. In order to be eligible to consider it as contributing to 30 by 30, a site has to be protected, and it has to be under long-term management for biodiversity. So by long-term, we mean 30 years. So currently then, we're looking at protected sites, national nature reserves, SSSIs, and special areas of conservation. They are eligible to be considered towards 30 by 30. There's also a range of other sites that don't have such strong protection, but there is a pathway that they can follow to so that they can be counted. It's quite a new term. It's called Naturfa. And there's a range of sites, local nature reserves, and bodies such as National Trust, Wildlife Trust, conservation bodies like RSPB, and sites owned and managed by the National Park. They could be eligible for this as well. And then there's a range of other sites that may have potential as well, other places where we can look to work towards long-term management for biodiversity, but it's unclear how much uptake there will be amongst private landowners. So that's where things like common land and tenanted land, there are possibilities there, but it really will require a lot of collaboration with the landowners. So for all of these different types of sites, we collated the spatial boundaries. So we had them in the GIS ready then to look at how they were managed and the condition of the sites. So we've got the site boundaries. We need to work out which ones are contributing and which ones aren't. These are the rules that determine whether or not a site is contributing. It has to have a management plan focused on biodiversity, okay? Because if there's no plan, your site is at risk. The site has to be reasonably current, because things change, and if you're not updating your plan, again, your habitats and your species are at risk. The site has to be in good condition. I mean, there are different condition categories, and the two condition categories that are eligible are favourable or unfavourable but recovering. Everything else, well, it's not contributing to biodiversity if it's in really bad condition. And again, you have to have monitoring. The condition assessment can't be old. You can't have visited the site 30 years ago and assume that because it was in good condition then, it's still in good condition now. You have to keep on monitoring. A site must meet all of those conditions in order to be given the stamp that it's contributing to 30 by 30. But then condition is not such an easy thing to classify. And different types of sites have different ways of assessing the condition. And some types of sites have no condition assessments at all. And there were plenty of data gaps. For some sites, we couldn't find any information at all. And for other sites, we suspected there was a lot of information. We didn't have the time to collate it all. So this really it's a first sweep, and it's doing the best we can. It's to get the thing moving, because if we don't start somewhere, we've got nothing to work with at all. But with SSSIs, triple SIs are designated based on lots of different features. And we were very harsh with them. We said, if any one of those features is failing on condition, then the whole thing is failing on condition. So that could be a habitat type. Maybe the woodland is in great condition, but the population of, I don't know, dormice has disappeared. You can't find them, so it's failing. The whole site fails. So we were quite harsh. The national park have their own system for assessing condition on a red, amber, green basis. And so with that process, then anything that was green or amber was said to be passing, anything that was red was failing. And then the National Trust then had their own different site assessment process, which we translated into pass or fail with respect to 30 by 30. And then, so we were able to attribute all of our different sites with a pass or a fail based on the management plan. Does it have one? Does it not? How old is it? What's the condition status? When was the last condition assessment? And produce maps of each. And I don't want you to focus too much on the detail there, but just notice that all of the maps are different. There are different colours for the different sites, meaning that some sites pass on some things and fail on the others. And they have to pass everything to be counting towards 30 by 30. So when we combine them, the overall picture is that 4.6% of the national park qualifies for 30 by 30, okay, which doesn't sound very good, but you know, some of the sites may be just failing on one small thing, but this now steers the park and it steers the other stakeholders like NRW, like the Wildlife Trust. What do they need to focus on? If they think, hang on, that's in really good condition, why is it failing? It hasn't got a management plan. Well, that's something you need to do, and the sites need the management plan. But then if a site's failing on condition, that's potentially a bigger issue. Why is it failing on condition? What needs to be done? When you sum up the areas of all of those different types of sites, that's over 30% of the national park, 32.6%. But then if you remember, some of those sites include things like common land, might be very, very difficult to bring to bring under management for biodiversity. So if we're looking at the very, very high potential sites, that's the protected areas and the Wildlife Trust sites, things like that, that's 25.6% of the national park. So they're almost there. With all this potential land, they're almost there at the 30 by 30 level, in terms of the amount of land available, but they need to find some extra land somewhere. They need to be creating sites. They need to be designating more land and working to restore habitats. And this gives us an idea of the scale of the work needed. So how do we do that? Because, well, I don't know, you could create a bit of grassland anywhere, couldn't you? But it might not be the best place to enhance biodiversity. So the next part of our work was to identify key spots that would really make the most difference to the existing key habitats. So in this case, we're now not making the habitat, we're collating a lot of existing habitat data, things like living whales, things like the National Trust habitat data, and combining those to make a detailed continuous habitat map for Pembrokeshire and the surrounding area. And use that then for further modelling of ecological connectivity and what's the potential for restoration across Pembrokeshire. And we held a workshop down at, with the National Park to talk about their priorities. Some key priorities for them are the coastal strip and heathlands and grasslands in the Preseli area, and connecting up Atlantic oak woodland. So those are the things we focused on. What we looked at using the habitat map, we looked at landscape permeability for different ecosystems, for woodlands, grasslands, heathlands, wetlands, and the coast. There are some existing data sets from NRW there, principal ecological networks. We went to another level of detail, so we've got like the minor networks in there as well. And then we've got the corresponding grassland network. You can see the fragmentation of the grasslands there. You've got key grassland areas in black, and then the orange areas are the places that are permeable, that facilitate movement of species from one site to another. And you want to try and encourage the movement so that if one site suffers a disturbance, if there's a big storm, or if there's a fire, or if there's a pollution, the species have somewhere to go, or they have places where they can go forage. So this is why we try and encourage habitat connectivity, and it helps you home in and identify areas that could really be very transformatory if you restore habitats in these locations. This is the coastal network. This is something that the National Park didn't have before. They really wanted something to highlight the importance of the coastal strip. And this shows the location of the key habitats there in black. It also shows the amount of fragmentation there. And this is a vulnerable area because obviously there's a lot of erosion, and there's a very kind of hard stop there at the edge of the coastline. It switches straight into intensively managed agricultural land. So there's no buffer there, and that's something that they're quite keen to work on. So this is kind of hot off the press. It's not complete, but these are draft opportunity maps then for grassland and heathland in the Preseli area. We've got the areas in green then that are places where the land is suitable for habitat restoration. We've considered a range of constraints, things like the soil type and existing land use. And then for Atlantic oakwood opportunities, we're focusing on connecting the existing areas of Atlantic oakwood, so Pengethley SAC, North Pembrokeshire SAC and Pengethley Forest. And then the coastal opportunities then, we're focusing on 1,000 metres from the coast, but then really trying to keep it one field back, and looking at potential areas of dairy farming in the area as well, because those areas kind of with higher potential for making a big difference to the habitat networks. So just to sum up, I think what we've gleaned today from so many great talks is that, you know, the historic data is just so important for a range of applications and addressing modern day problems, but it has to be accessible, and it's just so encouraging to see all the work that's going into revitalising and making this information accessible, because maps really tell us a story and help us focus in and find out where we need to make a difference, where we can make the biggest difference. And doing that in GIS doesn't tell us just what's happening and how much. The big thing is being able to quantify things. We can start developing environmental accounts, but then it also holds us accountable. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gemma. I'd open the floor to any questions. Has anyone got any questions? Yeah, in the front.
I was just wondering, your Atlantic oakwood, is that what is sometimes referred to as a temperate rainforest, or is it different?
Atlantic oakwood. I don't know the answer to that question, I'm afraid. But I want to know the answer.
You were talking about the importance of maintaining sort of historic data sets and things. I was wondering sort of what do you as a company do with the data that you create? You know, do you archive that? Do you find ways of making sure it doesn't get corrupted or lost, or that you have systems that can read it in the future?
It depends on the client that we work for. So some clients will want to publish the data. We create the data and it goes to the customer. Sometimes we host data online and that will be a sort of a time-limited service based on, a subscription. In terms of data we hold once a project finishes, then we don't hold it, it gets deleted.
Thank you for a really interesting talk. I noticed Bogota on your list there. Is that somewhere where you're actively working now? And can tell us a little bit more about that. I went there a couple of years ago and was petrified, mainly because I had to have security to make sure I wasn't kidnapped. I was at Cardiff University at the time, and they seemed to put a bounty on my head by giving me a certificate for my insurance, which I won't go into how much it was, but it doesn't help. But how is that project going, and is it possible to work in an environment like that?
So the political changes have been quite challenging. The work we've been doing out there is mostly on the agricultural side, so looking at things like yield forecasts and also some climate change studies and crop suitability studies. So looking at land that's suitable for, say, bananas and coffee, and looking at climate change predictions, and seeing, well, are these areas likely to be suitable for the crop in the future? If not here, where else?
To the back.
Thank you. Can you tell us, I wasn't sure, is Scotland included in the spatial inventory of coastal regions?
It isn't, no.
Those maps are very powerful, the Pembrokeshire ones, in terms of the 30 by 30 targets. How much the Welsh Government buying into those? It's pretty obvious Pembrokeshire's probably one of the more biodiverse counties in Wales in terms of how far away over the next 4 years we are from achieving those targets, and how much ground we need to make, especially with the agri-environment schemes and the like.
Yeah. In terms of actual quantification like this, we're still in the early days, really. So I don't think there isn't a complete picture for Wales at the moment. I don't see any reason why Pembrokeshire should be vastly different to any other area. Every other area is going to face the same challenges of there's a large amount of designated sites, and a large amount of them are in poor condition. And that has been the case for a long time, and it's a bigger problem.
Is there any questions online? I know there's a few questions online. Okay. Yes, the lady in the front there.
Mine's a similar sort of question. Is do you know whether NRW are actually using any of this data that you're generating to prioritise or highlight the SSSIs or NNRs that are in poor status or would benefit from that approach that you have?
So we use their data, their condition assessment data, to produce this map. So they capture the data. They're aware of which sites are failing, and yeah.
And do you know whether through NRW this data is going to be sort of made publicly available through sort of Data Map Wales, in terms of being able to look and see? So if I had a farm, is my farm something that I could change on it? Would it contribute to the linking up and the connectivity based on your maps and your assessment?
So this data is unclear at the moment how this data will be used. It's for the national park. The national park make big efforts to strike up relationships with landowners and build up personal relationships, and I would imagine they'll be using the information to start conversations. I can see them being quite wary of publishing maps online. We find this quite often. People can quite often take a map very literally, and they think that if their land is on a map, it means that somebody has designs on it for something, and it can make people very standoffish. So I think a softer approach is probably...
I was thinking from the flip side of that, where if you're looking at the new sustainable farming scheme now, there's opportunities to perhaps put land into better condition, or revert from improved grassland to hay meadows, or plant areas of woodland. So it potentially gives the landowners an opportunity to look at where the best things are that would connect, that would give a better environment, and perhaps earn them more money through the sustainable farming scheme.
It is an opportunity. It would need to be probably through the collaborative layer, because the other than the collaborative layer, I think is relatively short term, and what we're looking for is long term management. So the 30 years. It's possible.
You've got time for one more question? Yes, lady in the front.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I'd like to understand a bit more about this categorisation of sort of second-tier sites called Natirva. Is that just for Pembrokeshire, or does that apply? Will that be used for the whole of Wales? And who defined it, and who decided to include forestry plantations?
So this is still in development. It's a Welsh Government working group that's developing the Natirva concept. And this was needed because of, it's really for places that aren't currently protected areas. And the thing about national parks is they are protected areas. But so technically they should be already eligible for 30 by 30, but national parks were not designated for the purpose of biodiversity, which means they're not eligible. So a new term was needed. They fall into the OECM category, which is sites of other ecological conservation management. But that term can't be applied to protected sites either, so a new term was needed, and long story short, they're calling it Natirva. And it's a way for national parks, really private landowners, to contribute to 30 by 30. So the idea is they will need to show that they meet the criteria for the current quality of the habitats, that it's under long-term management. There's some kind of community involvement. The exact criteria are still under development. Yeah.
Okay, can we all give a warm hand to Gemma? Thank you very much.